G'day and welcome to Tartarian Truthers with your hosts, Casey and JoJo. We are back with another mind-blowing episode, this time looking at the many churches and cathedrals we have here in Australia. But before we get started, Casey, what is Tartaria? Honestly, we left everyone hanging at the end of our last episode. So we should probably fill the people in, shouldn't we?
We should.
Especially considering that we are called the Tartarian Truthers after all.
Yes, you're right, JoJo. It's probably for the best. Because we did in fact drop an interesting little truth bomb at the end of episode 3. So if you haven't seen it yet, what we alluded to was the fact that there is possibly, well, in our minds definitely, an alternative history, which includes a vast technologically advanced empire called Tartaria that emanated from Northeast Asia right across this realm. So the people of this empire apparently built vast cities and infrastructure on every continent. It's pretty wild. But what happened to Tartaria? Why didn't we learn about it at school? Why have they been removed from all the maps? These are some questions that we're going to answer together. So let's read this quote straight from Wikipedia. It explains exactly what Tartaria isn't. Don't you just love Wiki? So, since about 2016, conspiracy theories about the supposed lost empire of Tartaria have gained some steam on the internet. The conspiracy is based mostly in a misunderstanding of architectural history. Adherents suppose that demolished buildings, such as the Singer Building or the temporary grounds of the 1915's World Fair, were actually the buildings of a vast empire based in Tartary that has been suppressed from history. Sumptuously styled Gilded Age buildings are often held out as really having been built by the supposed Tartarian. The conspiracy is very light on details and only vaguely describes how such a supposedly advanced civilization, which had reputedly achieved world peace, could have fallen and been hidden. The idea that a mud flood wiped out much of the world and thus old buildings is common, supported only by the fact that some buildings have basements which had windows. World War I and II are cited as a way in which Tartaria was destroyed and hidden, reflecting the reality that the extensive bombing campaigns of World War II did destroy many historic buildings. The general evidence for the theory is that there are similar styles of building around the world, such as capitol buildings with domes or star forts. However, such designs exist globally due to colonialism by empires such as Britain, Spain, and Portugal, not some lost empire such as Tartaria. The theory reflects a cultural discontent with modernism and a supposition that traditional styles are inherently good and modern styles are bad. So Wikipedia is putting us in our place, JoJo.
They sure are.
It's all just a crazy conspiracy theory and nothing more. But if that's the case, then why do we have declassified CIA documents that mention Tartaria? Listen to this. This is an excerpt of a declassified CIA document created in 1957. Or let us take the matter of history, which along with religion, language, and literature, constitute the core of a people's cultural heritage. Here again, the communists have interfered in a shameless manner. For example, on the 9th of August 1944, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, sitting in Moscow, issued a directive ordering the party's Tartar Provincial Committee to proceed to a scientific revision of the history of Tartaria, to liquidate serious shortcomings and mistakes of a nationalistic character committed by individual writers and historians in dealing with Tartar history. In other words, Tartar history was to be rewritten. Let us be frank, was to be falsified in order to eliminate references to great Russian aggressions and to hide the facts of the real course of Tartar-Russian relations. And this was no isolated case. In every Muslim area within the USSR, historians on orders of the Communist Party have rewritten history to distort the facts so that the Russians appear always in a good light. Needless to say, histories which present the facts truthfully have been withdrawn and destroyed so that the present and future generations of Muslims are forever denied the chance of learning the true facts of their nation's past. So there we have it. Coming from a government department, albeit not one with the best reputation, but we have evidence that Tartaria existed and that history was in fact altered to better suit the controller's narrative. And of course, to cause further confusion and division among the people, which of course, still happening to this very day.
So even though we have old maps that quite clearly show Tartaria, old books that discuss Tartaria, images of the Tartarian flag, and Tartarian architecture still standing in almost every country, we are still meant to believe that it's all a conspiracy theory. I don't know about you guys out there listening to this, but we just don't buy it, do we, Casey?
No way, JoJo. There is just too much evidence out there proving that Tartaria was a real empire, and people are uncovering more and more each and every day. There are people all over the world researching and digging deeper into this alternative side of history, and the things that they are discovering is nothing short of mind-blowing.
So this brings us back to Australia's churches and cathedrals and why we want to reintroduce them to you in a different light. You might remember from our last episode, we showed you how many of them looked very similar to those right across our realm. So many of the structures from our comparisons episode had the exact same design and architectural style. Every city and small town in Australia has a church that looks as though it's from another time.
They sure do, JoJo, but if you go with the historical narrative, these churches and cathedrals were all built around the same time in the 1800s. It's really hard to believe we had enough people to work on each of the construction sites.
I know, impossible to think that there were multiple job sites operating at the same time, needing the same building materials and labor force, and not to mention using very primitive tools and having limited transportation means, especially when we know what we know in regards to population and manufacturing in Australia back then from our previous episodes. Anyway, let's take a look at some of our amazing churches and cathedrals, shall we? So as you can see, we have some absolutely magnificent old world architecture all over Australia. And we have all been led to believe that churches and cathedrals are places of worship. And we don't blame them. I mean, they are just so majestic and beautiful and create a sense of peace and calm, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
But let us put this theory to you. What if they originally had another purpose? What if churches, cathedrals, and other buildings of worship were actually power stations and or healing centers? You're thinking, no way, right? But hear us out. There is evidence that the buildings that are now used by various religions as places of worship in our present day originally functioned as a type of hospital or health and well-being center during the reign of the Tartarian Empire.
So let us put this theory to you. What if using architectural form and shape to attract the natural static electrical charge present in the atmosphere, it was then harnessed and used throughout the buildings and surrounding areas? A type of free energy, harnessed and harvested from the ether, an energy source that is constantly surrounding us all. Drawing electricity from the atmosphere would be relatively simple if the cities were planned with buildings designed to properly attract, collect, and dispense the accumulated current. We call this old world technology Antiquatec. So, Antiquatec could harness and channel the naturally occurring ether from the atmosphere into buildings. It could generate light and could even be used to regulate temperature. So you're wondering how, right? How could certain building designs harvest a natural energy that then creates the perfect free and natural energy source for human beings? So the basic strategy of harvesting ether is to build a tall tower, top it with aerials made of a conductive material, which are designed to attract the ether charge from the atmosphere, and then channel it into the structure.
So this image explains it perfectly and also gives light to why these magnificent structures may in fact be called cathedrals. Cathode roll. A cathode is a type of electrode through which electrons move. Electrodes are a semiconductor, usually a metal, that is connected to something that is not metal. A cathode delivers electrons, negative charge, and the anode collects electrons that have a positive charge. Now, how was the accumulated energy distributed throughout the building? Obviously, we don't know for sure, and we aren't experts in electrical energy by any means, but there are a few different theories out there. Another theory involves sound. And as we know, these buildings, even today, still have amazing acoustic properties. So sound was used in two ways: by ringing the church bells to project the ether throughout the vicinity, and playing the big pipe organ to a tune and direct the effects for healing and well-being on those inside. Now, most of us recognize the obvious features of our churches and cathedrals, like the spires, the lanterns, the belfries, towers, and church bells, and some even have even more elaborate features. Have you ever looked at some of the doors? If you have, you may have noticed that they look very much like the 6-octave working range, don't you think?
Yes, it really does, JoJo. And once again, it refers back to using music and sound, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming more and more evident that these buildings could have, in fact, been extraordinarily designed machines that utilized free energy to produce not only light and heat, but incredible sound healing frequencies too. Wow, I've got goosebumps. But we can't forget the windows either. I mean, if everything else has a very specific and important purpose, I'm sure they did too, right? So these windows, which are often referred to as rose windows or the flowers of life, we've been led to believe are merely decorative. But if you remember from one of our earlier episodes where we looked into the history of glass manufacturing here in Australia, we didn't actually have the means for those capabilities until well into the 20th century. So, keeping that in mind, the theory continues that the glass was actually added after these buildings were hijacked and repurposed as religious infrastructure. Because if you think about it, Jojo, if there wasn't any glass in those beautifully shaped windows and the organ and all the bells were playing inside, imagine how far those beautiful healing sound frequencies would have traveled right across the city.
It would have been absolutely incredible, huh? So, this is a good place to introduce cymatics. Cymatics is the visualization of sound and vibration in matter, something that is being found in the art and design of cultures from around the world for centuries. These are cymatics images of various musical notes in water, comparing them to the windows on cathedrals and churches that can be found all over our realm. Here's an example of cymatics in water. Pretty incredible, huh? So, can you imagine sitting even just in the park across the road from one of these buildings back in the day when it was working at full capacity? Pipe organ playing, bells ringing, and the sound frequencies emanating through those beautiful windows and doors. I don't think we could really even comprehend what that would have felt like.
I agree. It's almost totally beyond our realm of understanding because of what we've been led to believe about our current and past realities. This just seems so unreal to us. But the more that we look into these magnificent structures, the more evidence that we find, because there are more amazing design features that just can't possibly be for aesthetics. Let's move on now and take a look at some of the interiors. How beautiful are they? Not one detail overlooked. And they all seem to have very similar layouts, as you can see here. Notice how geometrically precise they are, using what appears to be sacred geometry. Sacred geometry ascribes symbolic and sacred meanings to certain geometric shapes and certain geometric proportions. It is associated with the belief that a god is the geometer of the world. The study of sacred geometry has its roots in the study of nature and the mathematical principles at work therein. Many forms observed in nature can be related to geometry. For example, the chambered nautilus grows at a constant rate, and so its shell forms a logarithmic spiral to accommodate that growth without changing shape. Also, honeybees construct hexagonal cells, to hold their honey. These and other correspondences are sometimes interpreted in terms of sacred geometry and considered to be further proof of the natural significance of geometric forms.
So, why would people in the 1800s build like this? And how? How did they know how to build using sacred geometry? And how did they build such mind blowing architecture using horse and cart and hand tools? It really doesn't make any sense, does it?
It really doesn't add up at all. At all. So, to everyone out there listening today, after looking at everything in this episode, do you really believe the historical narrative and the timeline that we've been taught? As we've already mentioned, our early settlers were clearly incapable of constructing these grand buildings and structures. And if we are the most sophisticated species currently in this realm, why don't we still build beautiful architecture like that? Beautiful buildings that evoke in us a sense of awe and wonder. Why do we now build like this? Boxy, boring, and totally lacking of character and beauty. It's a shame, isn't it, JoJo?
Such a shame, Casey. And, you know, they do call this style brutalism. You know that. And the reason they call it that is because it doesn't evoke any kind of happiness or joy, does it?
At all.
Not at all.
Mm-mm.
So on that note, we will leave you here. We would love to know your thoughts. So please leave us a comment or drop us a line, message us on our socials, and you can find our links to our Instagram handles in the description below. We'll be taking a little break, everybody, for a couple of weeks as I am moving. I'm relocating up to the Central Coast very soon, but we will see you guys very, very soon. It doesn't mean we're going to stop doing what we're doing, does it, Casey?
No way. We're just taking a couple of weeks break. And then we'll be back on track.
Still researching, still putting together something in the background. I know us.
We won't stop. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you like our content. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
Bye, everyone.